This video will discuss different ways to approach class interaction in online spaces. In the last video, I discussed how rhetorical approaches to writing influenced American education with an understanding that writing is a way of thinking that should be taught as a process, not a product. Dialoguing with each other and talking about writing is a key element to this kind of writing instruction. With the rise of online learning, replicating this kind of interaction in these spaces can be difficult. Many writing classrooms today are based on what might be called a workshop model. In other words, much of the class is focused on students developing their writing process and doing actual writing in the classroom, where the instructor can interact face-to-face. Each class period usually contains 3 different kinds of activities: lecture, discussion, and writing. A workshop classroom differs from the usual lecture-based class. Typically, a workshop class will spend the majority of time centered on student work and interaction. So 10% on lecture, 20% on discussion, and 70% on student writing. This has often been called the student-centered or flipped classroom because it is the opposite of the traditional classroom, which is typically 70% lecture, 20% discussion, and 10% student work. This workshop model can be difficult to replicate online, but has been made more possible as technology improves. To better understand interaction in these spaces, we can think about 3 types of interactions that are essential to any writing classroom: learner to instructor, learner to content, and learner to learner. For our classes, though, we'll be focusing on learner to instructor and learner to learner because we have different course content. These interactions mostly happen in discussion forums when using learning management systems like Moodle. Learner-to-learner interaction can actually improve in online contexts because students have time to think before writing a post or commenting. This promotes more interaction from shy students or students who need to review course content before contributing their thoughts. It also allows students to double-check their writing when communicating in another language. But instructor facilitation is key to getting students to actually dialogue with one another. Too often, students see discussion spaces as learner to instructor instead of learner to learner. That's why it's important to assign students time to actually comment on each other's posts in meaningful ways, instead of just waiting for instructor comments. Instructor immediacy or presence can help increase learner-to-learner interaction. In a face-to-face classroom, the instructor can walk around the room, participate in discussions, comment directly on student work through dialogue. Students feel your presence in these kinds of classrooms. That's not automatically the case in online spaces. So as our students discuss culture for the next few weeks, it's important to think about how we can facilitate discussion as instructors. So what are some ways to increase instructor immediacy online? First, try to include visual elements. Though videos are certainly ideal, these take a lot of work. But you can also make sure you and your students have profile pics if available in your learning management system. Or have everyone post a picture of themselves with their introductions. Visually seeing each other will help us bond as a community even though we are many miles apart. Second, make different kinds of comments, not just evaluative comments. Congratulate students on an interesting thought. Ask a question that might be discussed more. Add your own thought to a student discussion. In many ways, we are modeling how to interact and collaborate in online settings. The more we interact, the more students will interact. Thirdly, try to address students by names whenever possible. This gives a sense of personal connection. I also recommend referring to specific sentences or posts to show your own engagement with the discussion. This often encourages them to write more because they know you're reading closely. Fourthly, always create specific assignments to ask your students to comment on existing posts, including questions or ideas to think about. For example, you can ask them to look for connections with Polish culture that they can explain or discuss, or maybe ask a question about a particular post that they didn't quite understand. We want comments that drive discussion further. Depending on the environments you have available, there may be other options as well. For example, I often hold discussions in Google+, which is a lot like Facebook, where I can +1 or like good posts. But these 4 practices should help us have successful discussions in Moodle. Can you think of other ways to increase student interaction or increase instructor immediacy? I encourage you to think about this as we begin this project with our students.